Welcome back to the Theology of the Buddy podcast, episode 34. You are in for a real treat this episode, as Chris and Mike candidly delve into the topic of music. They share a hilarious story from their vacation this summer and share the impact that good music has had on their lives, and the impact that bad music can have. They also explore and offer a possible middle ground for trads who feel they cannot enjoy modern music. We hope you enjoy!
All right, welcome back to the Theology of the Buddy podcast, a podcast for cool people like me and my friend here, Mike. Say hello to the good people, Mike.
Hello, good people. I don't know, cool people might be a bit of an exaggeration, but nonetheless, here I am.
How are you, man? How you doing?
How's it going, buddy?
Good.
Good.
How's your week been?
It's been pretty busy, but we did get out shopping today, which I gather you did as well.
I did quite a bit of shopping. Well, I did more shopping. Did I do any shopping today? I did not do shopping today, but I did all day shopping yesterday. Yeah. And that was crazy because we were shopping for baby stuff. It's getting really real. You know what that's like.
Yeah. It's real. It's been really real for a long time over here.
But just so that first experience, right? Of like you go out and like we had to pick up a ton of stuff and it was like so much money and you're like, ugh, like being a parent is expensive.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. There's like certain times in life, right, where it feels like every time you leave the house, you end up spending a ton of money.
Yeah.
Like you can't leave home without spending hundreds of dollars. And I found the other time was when you get a house.
Yeah.
You guys are kind of doing both, right?
Yeah.
You got a new house. You got a baby showing up pretty soon.
Yeah, we just kind of got
first baby is the expensive baby because you got to get all the baby stuff. And then when you have the second baby, it's like, they can just use all the sibling stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's been quite amazing though. Like there has been a real outpouring of kindness and generosity from a lot of our friends, even from people that we are friends with, but we haven't seen for a long time. They just kind of picked up and they're like, hey, I've got a ton of baby stuff. You want to use it? So it's been kind of cool, having, seeing the generosity of other people coming in. It's been really neat.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Feel that village around you.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know, like being a dad kind of forces you to start also like doing a lot of introspection about the kind of legacy you want to leave for your children, and like the kind of thing.
Also, being emo makes you introspect a lot too, which
also being Carmelite does as well.
So you've got the trifecta: emo, Carmelite, dad.
Somebody's been looking at my recent Spotify listens or something.
Yes.
Too funny.
Yes, I have.
But yeah, no, dude, like, you've derailed the podcast. Congratulations.
Sorry, I killed it.
But yeah, so I don't know. Do you want to? We'll just kind of switch gears and talk about the fact that
the best part is you had a perfect transition going into talking about this Me Without You thing. Yeah, and I'm just like, no, Chris, wait a second. You're emo.
It's so painfully true. That's the thing. Oh no. Oh geez, dude. So no transition on this. Let's just talk about it. Me Without You, one of my favorite bands one of your favorite bands. They just
one
announced
of the best bands that Chris introduced me to.
Yes.
Over the years.
Yes. 2005, I introduced you. No, probably 2004, I introduced you. Because that's when their most iconic album dropped on the world, which was Catch for Us the Foxes. Yeah.
And that's the one that you introduced me to. And then I went back to A to B Life earlier.
Yeah.
Like later.
Yeah. So sadly they have
what an amazing album that was.
Yeah, dude. So good. So good. But yeah, they just recently announced that they're breaking up as a band, which we kind of saw that coming. I mean, they've been around for many years. They've been around longer than
approximately
we've been friends.
10,000 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So in honor of their forthcoming, I don't know, they're careful not to call it a breakup as a band, but like
their forthcoming death. What was it that, just to go totally even further off topic?
Yeah.
What was it Five Iron Frenzy said? Like, don't call it a breakup. Call it something else. It was something outrageous, like a disaster, or like don't think of it as us breaking up. Think of it as like your dog being put down or something like that.
Yeah, dude. Oh man, but it kind of feels like that a bit. I don't know if you feel kind of the same way, but I definitely am
the
feeling
band
it.
is too old to be a living dog.
Dogs don't live that long.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes me feel really bad. I have 3 dogs. Thanks for bringing that up. Now I'm even more emo and introspective. Thanks.
Your dogs will die someday, and so will you.
Oh no. But yeah, no. So in honor of their breakup, they re-released this new album on vinyl, which I was late to the game in terms of collecting vinyl records. So when I got into it, they had already stopped printing this album on vinyl, and to get a copy of it was like $300 because it was so rare. And so I just like hoped and prayed that they would someday, maybe even when they announced the breakup, would release their most iconic album on vinyl. And here we are. So of course they announced that they were going to be dropping the news at midnight on Friday night. So I stayed up till midnight, and like 12 o'clock on the dot, I ordered my copy of the vinyl. So and it's a collector's edition, so it's like even more stupidly expensive. But this is a long segue into the fact that one of the things that I want to be able to pass down to my kids is this album. It's the one album that I've always wanted to have on vinyl. And because it was such a beautifully done album. I don't know, man. Like when I discovered this album, it made me love
something
music.
It's an album where I find there's more and more depth to it when you listen to it.
Yeah.
There's so much to the lyrics and the delivery too.
Yeah.
It's so great.
Yeah. And what was really cool is Mike and I have been friends for a very long time. And so obviously we were friends when this album came out. And then 10 years later, on their 10-year anniversary, they toured, and we got to go to the tour.
At the show.
Yeah. And so we got to hear them play the album from front to back. And that was an experience too. Like, happy memories, man. That was good times.
Yeah. Those were good times.
It was weird though, because it was like you, Julie, and I, and Brooke came along, but Brooke hadn't really been exposed to Me Without You to the degree that the three of us had. So it kind of felt like we were throwing her right into the deep end, you know? Like as soon as Aaron Weiss, the lead singer, began singing January 1979, like the crowd exploded. It just like the room just shook. And everybody just got so pumped. And like, I felt like Brooke was like, what is happening right now?
Yeah. And me and Julie are just kind of like belting out the lyrics.
Yeah.
And Brooke's like, I don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I don't know if you've seen the comic with the aliens.
Yeah.
That one where it's like, I'm going to show you. Oh yeah. You sent it to Father Steve. Where it's like, I'm going to show you this thing that's my favorite. And the alien's like, the pressure to appreciate this is overwhelming. I think that's how Brooke felt going to Me Without You with us. And we were all like, oh, this is the best band in the whole world and you're going to love it so much. And she's just like, what if it's not my favorite?
Yeah. What if I don't love it as much as you guys? Am I still in? Am I still loved?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny.
Exactly.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
Oh man. The things we put Brooke through. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
But so I don't know, like with that album in particular, like it made me fall in love with music in a whole new way. The album did at the time and still does help me to know myself better. Like every time I listen to it, I'm inspired to write poetry without fail. I'm always inspired. It's almost like scripture. Like I pick it up and I find something new, something fresh, and it helps me to know God better too. There are so many allusions to God in that album that, it inevitably raises your mind to something more transcendent. Like,
and so much scriptural content too in that album, and really smartly put together.
Yeah.
It's almost like reading some kind of commentary, but in poetic form, right?
Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. So in this episode, we're going to be looking at music, in particular, its impact on our own lives and our faith. And we're going to be looking into the question of the morality of modern music. So just for the record, it's not going to be like a deep dive into the realm of philosophy. Like we're not by any means real theologians here, or nor are we spiritual directors
or philosophers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we'll take a few glances along the way at philosophy and theology and whatnot. And another thing too, this podcast is not going to make the claim that all Catholics need to think or act the way that we do. This is not meant to be like that. We're just simply.
But if you're cool, you will.
True. But we're simply sharing about something that we're passionate about and something that has greatly impacted our faith. Because I think, no spoilers, but I really do think that if it wasn't for good music in my life, I don't know necessarily how my faith would have grown. Because I do see kind of the two things as being very interconnected from the very beginning. And I mean, Mike and I, for example, we even met within the context of music. We were involved in music at our parish, and it has been music has kind of been one of the many ingredients of the glue that has kept us together as friends, because there's always been that as a commonality between us. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we can kind of kick it into high gear by first dedicating this episode to a very special person. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So maybe let's
do this very important dedication.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's in the context of our trip that we took this past summer, which we're going to talk a bit more about later.
Yeah.
But on the way home, we stopped at PF Chang's, and it was fairly late at night, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it was kind of a late dinner. It was probably like 10 o'clock or something.
Yeah, 8 or 9. Yeah. Yeah. Sun was setting, and it was just the restaurant really wasn't that full.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a Sunday night or something.
Yeah. So we want to dedicate this podcast to a hero.
Yes.
A courageous young man that we encountered and were inspired by in this PF Chang's.
We have been holding on to this story for 4 months or 5 months. How long's it been?
Yeah, and
July, August, September.
Since
October.
August.
5 months.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I get the feeling it's going to be one of those things where we're like, this is the best story ever, and 5 months later it seems underwhelming.
Yeah.
But in the moment, it was amazing.
Yeah.
Anyways, and it was just funny. Like, I happened to catch a snatch of conversation from the booth behind Chris. We're sitting in a booth, and there's another booth behind Chris. And the exact quote was something like, yeah, he's definitely one of my top 3 harmonica players. Right? That was how it started.
Yeah. And I, at this time too, I'm also picking up on this, and like I see Mike's eyes, and he looks at me, and I look at him, and we're like, okay, let's stop talking.
We're both
and
just listening to this guy. Yeah. So he talks about this harmonica player that he's obsessed with, and then he started talking about progressive rock and stuff.
Yeah.
Like
but you have to understand, this is a young man, and he's on a date with a girl.
Yeah, that's
so
we were looking into each other's eyes listening, and Chris couldn't see. But I was looking over his head at the guy, and I just looked at Chris and kind of whispered, like, he's on a date. Like, he's I just like to imagine that this guy is on a blind date, and this is what he decided to try to woo this lady with, talking about.
This kid is pulling out all the stops.
Rock band.
He is like,
and his favorite harmonica players.
It was just the best, because we're just like, this kid is going for it. Like, this kid has no shame. He's like, this is who I am. If you dig it, like, this is it.
Yeah, here it is. I'm gonna lay it all out there.
Yeah.
No secrets after this.
It reminded me of that little interlude in Nerd Out from Heath McNeice, where Heath McNeice is on a date with a girl, and he's talking to her about how cheesed he is that Tom Bombadil is not featured in Fellowship of the Ring in the movies.
Which he's totally right about.
Yeah, and she's like going on, and she's like, Heath, oh my gosh, Heath. And at the end, she's like, I think we need to see other people. You know? Like, oh, yeah. So, thumbs up to that guy. True hero.
I mean, it's totally possible that was his wife, and that's what they love.
I didn't see any
talk
ring.
about, but
I did not see a ring.
I'm just assuming this was a random blind date, and that was his just his lead out, because that just makes it for me.
Oh, dude, there was no ring. I checked on the way out. I walked by and just kind of double check, and just to double check, I was like, "There's no ring." So I'm like, "This kid is true hero. This is
that confirms it.
This is an Alexander Chugawel of music."
Yeah, he just found that girl on Catholic Match, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. So, if we have any listeners in Lansing who enjoy harmonicas and prog rock, thumbs up, dude.
We love you. Be our friends. Play Dungeons and Dragons with us.
This message brought to you by Brooke. Oh my gosh. So, yeah, just it's such a great story. So, when this happened, we were coming back from the Audio Feed Music Festival, which is technically it's a Christian music festival. They don't necessarily.
They kind of just call it a music festival, but it's a lot of Christian bands and a lot of Christian stuff going on.
Yeah. It's definitely Christian friendly. And so because the majority of the bands are Christians, and the founders of it were the guys who originally were helping with Cornerstone Festival back in the day, which was another music festival.
And Cornerstone was specifically a Christian rock centered festival, right?
Yeah. And it was more so geared to more eclectic Christian rock. Like it wasn't like the more popular music festivals like Creation Fest or which kind of played the contemporary Christian music. It was more like just the harder bands within the Christian scene. So Mike and I went to Audio Feed Festival, but we did it kind of as a combination pilgrimage and music festival trip, as we tend to do whenever we go on trips. We always try to find ways to really incorporate the faith into our times away. We'll go to Mass. We definitely try to go to Latin Mass when we can. If there's one in the area, we find shrines and cathedrals and basilicas to visit. Yeah, so we just kind of incorporate that into it. So and it's kind of weird because it's so rare for us as more traditional Catholics to show up in a place like that where there's the Liberty spikes, people with spiked hair. Yeah, their hair's all crazy and they dress all kind of craziness, and I don't know, like, you know what I mean? Like it's not something you expect.
The trappings of what you'd expect at a metal show, right? Like, or like an indie concert. There's that kind of subculture there too.
Yep, exactly.
It's not like everyone dressed in slacks and button-up shirts. Right?
Yeah, it's true. I have a memory of Julie and I going down to Purple Door Festival, and on our way down, we dropped by. Oh man, I can't remember the name of it. There used to be a very popular Catholic bookseller in Minnesota. I can't remember their name. Might come back to me. Anyway, they recently shut down, but like very popular, like they sold old missals and old, Roman breviaries and things like that. And so Julie and I obviously wanted to visit this cool spot. So we went in and we browsed around and we bought a couple things. And on the way out, the owner said, "So why are you guys here from Canada?" And we're like, we're actually attending this music festival. And he was like, kind of took a double take and was like, "Why?"
Are you going there to preach to them to stop playing evil music?
Exactly. You could kind of tell like the cogs are turning. And we're just like, we just really enjoy this kind of music. And we didn't really get into a big conversation, but I mean, it was obvious that we were trads, that we preferred the Latin Mass, the traditional liturgy, the traditional devotions and traditional Catholic spirituality. We're Carmelites, but we still had this weird thing that they didn't seem to fit for him. So, but yeah, I don't know. Like it's weird kind of being like that. But I mean, for you and I in particular, I mean, this kind of connection with music goes back many years. And for me, I don't know about you, but for me, when I started listening to this kind of music, it was around the same time as my conversion. So I didn't necessarily get into a lot of bad music prior to that. Like I was pretty young. I still listened to some bad stuff and maybe we can talk about that a little later. But like when I started getting into music as kind of a pastime, as kind of like a passion, it was at a time when I was intentionally looking for good music. So, and Christian music in particular.
Yeah, it was pretty similar for me. I did, in high school, start getting into some of the like new metal stuff, like Linkin Park and stuff like that, before really having the reversion and starting to get serious about the faith. So I know I got into some bad bands, and there were CDs I had to throw out and stuff like that, right? And definitely, like, some of the stuff I look back and I'm like, wow, why did my parents even let me buy this? Some of the stuff, I think if they had known, they probably wouldn't have. But yeah, there was definitely a big turnaround in which bands I listened to once the faith became a big part of my life. But the style of music at that time, like, only got heavier, I think, right? Like, I was listening, a lot of the bad bands that I was listening to were kind of like the new metal rap core stuff. Like Limp Bizkit is one of the like terrible bands that I listened to, like that style. But then once I started getting into Christian music, I actually listened to a lot heavier stuff.
Yeah.
Toward the end of high school, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was kind of the same for me too. Like I guess it started out in kind of the pop side of things, because at that time, like, I was like 13, 12, so I was listening to things like, I listened to some NSYNC, some Backstreet Boys, like just whatever was on the radio at that time. And so, like, I remember...
Wait, are we in confession right now?
I know. But, like, I remember being introduced by a girl, who I was internet dating at the time through ICQ. I don't know if you remember ICQ, but we met through ICQ. And so...
Pepperidge Farm remembers.
Anyway, so she and I were chatting through ICQ. And she introduced me to Avalon. And so I started listening to Avalon because of a girl. And she dumped me though. So I now hate Avalon. But I mean,
Makes
it kind
sense.
of, but here's the funny thing. So of my own choice, I listened to Avalon, but my mother introduced me to Petra. So Avalon was like poppy, contemporary Christian music. My mom introduced me to Petra when I was 10, maybe 9. And like, I have specific memories of listening to the album More Power to Ya by Petra. And, I actually own that album on vinyl now. It's pretty great. But yeah, so I mean, my mom introduced me to heavier Christian music before I actually really got into it, which is funny and kind of weird. But
yeah, that's
heavier
in air quotes compared to like Christian metal, but like,
yeah. But compared to Avalon, it's much heavier. So
yeah.
But yeah, really as I got older, I did find I started getting into the heavier and heavier stuff. You know, started listening to Skillet, and then from there, Blindside.
Oh, that's heavy.
Yeah, Blindside and
Skillet's so heavy.
Old Skillet was interesting. They were definitely much different than they are now, and they definitely appealed to my sensibilities because when I was younger, I used to listen to Prodigy. Do you remember that band?
Yes, I remember. Yeah. I remember. I think they were on like Big Shiny Tunes.
Yes.
One of the ones that I had on a cassette tape as a kid.
Wait, hold on. American listeners, do they even know what Big Shiny Tunes is?
Oh, is that a Canadian thing?
I thought that was from Much Music back in the day.
Oh, yeah. There's a good chance it is.
Yeah.
So it was just like a best of current pop music type.
Yeah.
CD that you could buy.
Yeah. Too funny. Yeah. So like
and
Prodigy.
Also cassette.
Yeah. So Prodigy I was into, and then that led into kind of an appreciation for Skillet, but kind of segueing back to, talking about the impacts of bad music. I remember as a kid, there was a time when I rejected God. And when I know it sounds crazy, but I was like 10 years old and I basically rejected God in my life. And I remember that shortly after that time is when I started listening to Prodigy. And because one of my neighbors, who's a friend of mine, he enjoyed it and he was a little bit older than me. And so he introduced it to me. And I realized that I found in it something that I related to, right? And it was sadness and anger. And I didn't necessarily realize it, but I mean, the more I listened to that kind of music, the more depressed and sad and angry I became. Very interesting. Anyway, so finding, like, after my conversion, right, I was like, no, forget that noise. I don't want to listen to Prodigy anymore. But I found alternatives later on. But that can be something we talk about later. Yeah. So I don't know, like, kind of talking about music too, like just a random quick thing. Like, I don't know about you, but I find that if we look at our history, music has been what's kind of binded us together as brothers. So much of our friendship has music as a big part of it. I mean, even now we're in a Scola together, so it's kind of cool that that's kind of the case.
Yeah. That's almost like the culmination of us being in various bands and also Life Teen type church choirs and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
We've found our way to a way better liturgical choir.
Yeah. So do you want to hop into the next
one? This
thing?
has way more whiskey too, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about, like, kind of the heavier music and why it appealed and what might be good and beautiful about it?
Sure.
Potentially.
Yeah, potentially. Sure.
There's a few things that I thought about when I was kind of pondering this. The first thing that pops into my head is, and this is like mostly where I listen to music, is while I'm working. And it's almost like a musical coffee when I, need to write some code, put on some background music, and like certain bands kind of get you pumped up and feeling the energy to do some work.
Yeah.
And I find a lot of like heavier music is good for that, especially ones with little to no lyrics.
Yeah.
Just to kind of instrumentally, like, have a strong rhythm, kind of make you feel energized. It's almost like martial, like military marching music, right? Kind of keep the troops energized and moving.
Right.
I kind of find it the same kind of thing when I'm trying to focus on writing code at a computer, and otherwise I might be falling asleep at my keyboard, So yeah, in that way it can be good, like, to encourage you to do virtuous work. You can use it as a tool in that way.
Right. But maybe adversely, can we mention the adverse to that?
That can definitely be a double-edged sword.
Yeah, because I think there can be kinds of music that people listen to and that I've listened to in the past that has energized me, but towards things that are not good. So the reason why it energizes me is because it makes me angry. It gets my adrenaline pumping because I'm angry and I want to put a hole in the wall. I remember as a kid, as a teenager, I had a friend of mine who, we were hanging out and I went up to his bedroom and we were going to play some PS2, and he had punched a hole in the wall, and like a huge hole. And I was like, why'd you do that? And he said, I was listening to Linkin Park. And I was like, you're just listening to Linkin Park and you did that? It's like, yeah, it just got me jacked up and I put a hole in the wall. So there can be that inverse kind of effect too, right? It can either move you towards something that is good, like good and wholesome work, or to punch a hole in your wall, or to punch a hole in your friend, or
I had some negative experiences looking back with Linkin Park too, specifically same band.
Really weird.
And I remember because I was really into them as a teen and like early high school, and a lot of the content is about like being sad and depressed and stuff like that.
Right.
And it's kind of one of those things where maybe writing it is cathartic for people, or like listening to it, you can explore those things. But for me, it was wallowing in negative emotions when like, you're a teenager and a girl just broke up with you or something, and then you listen to emo songs and you just kind of wallow in sadness and anger and stuff like that. Totally understand that, although I never punched a hole in the wall. Probably because I was a weak nerd. Yeah. It's same kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And that goes for lots of different music styles, not just heavier ones, but music affects us emotionally, right? So, and throughout human history, that effect has been something that we've had to wrestle with using for positive or negative, right?
Right.
Like I mentioned, the kind of, I don't know, military application. But yeah.
Yeah. I think, so I was reading a quote from Benedict XVI. So he was talking about beauty, and he was saying how indeed an essential function of genuine beauty, as emphasized by Plato, is that it gives man a healthy shock. It draws him out of himself, wrenches him away from resignation and from being content with the humdrum. It even makes him suffer, piercing him like a dart, but in so doing, it reawakens him, opening afresh the eyes of his heart and mind, giving him wings, carrying him aloft. Right? So in the case that what you're talking about there, right, where the music forced, helped to lead us into self-hatred, to depression, sadness, into wallowing in our own sin, whatever it be. The question is, was that true and beautiful music that we were listening to? And if we look at that kind of litmus test, we could say no, that wasn't beautiful.
Yeah,
because it did the very opposite. It didn't awaken us to live a better life. It kind of forced us to go into our own sin and sadness and just stay there.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, I wanted to talk about how, like, getting into heavier Christian music, one of the things that really attracted me to it was the way it preached Christianity and how it was so like open, honest, like brutally honest, and preached the gospel without watering it down, without like any political correctness.
Yeah,
that really appealed as a young man, right?
Yeah,
so refreshing to see.
You don't see that in a lot of contemporary Christian music. It's kind of fluffed up a bit. It's kind of sappy in a way, but in those heavier scenes, you definitely see more of that raw kind of preaching. Yeah,
and this is something I think we were kind of starving for, that exists a lot more in the traditional devotion of the church, but not in modernist preaching and liturgy and devotion and in the culture at large, right? Everything's politically correct. Everything is safe, and anything that's outside the realms of what polite society wants is canceled, and you can't go there, right? But in metal, like, the culture is that you can say anything and like go ahead and shock people, which can be really bad. I mean, there's tons of bands out there being super blasphemous and terrible. But the Christian bands are a lot of the time preaching the gospel in a hardcore and unashamed way, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I wanted to like give an example. If you think, I'm just going to go for it.
Yeah.
We have this song which we kind of laugh at and appreciate in our group because it has this one line, and we always kind of juxtapose this Protestant Christian metal band against Bishop Barron and kind of the like the modernist Balthazarians and stuff.
Yeah. And
it's funny, like, it's this heavy kind of I guess hardcore type song, and then there's this part in the song where all the instruments cut out and you just hear the guy scream, "Universalism is a lie." It's so awesome to hear. Like,
yeah,
I love it.
Yeah.
And like the lyrics around this, I'll quote just for context. The full lyrics are, "King, Father God, most holy Christ, truly I tell you, he is coming back for his bride, not a whore. Universalism is a lie. Whilst there's breath in your lungs, pray for cleansing."
Yeah.
Now, imagine like Hillsong singing this. Right?
Yeah. It's, you can't, like, it's the music itself does not facilitate that kind of preaching.
Yeah.
It just, you can't.
And yet this kind of language in the Old Testament would be totally like, totally at home.
Yep.
You know,
I mean, it's at home in the
saints.
It's at home with the saints, man. Like, yeah. There's so many bands that we've seen, which, I mean, it's been kind of cool to see the impact that they've had. Like, when I think about bands like For Today, as an example, you know, standing in a crowded bar, you know, in this basement bar, and these guys get up in a scene where, you know, there are other secular bands playing before them, and they get up and they're basically preaching to the entire room to repent. We talk about, you know, you hear, you know, the Holy Father talking about, we have to go to the peripheries and reach out to those on the outskirts and And, you know, I don't see the church doing that in this kind of way. This is one of the hardest places, and the place where they would probably be afraid to be ganked. they'd be afraid they'd be beaten up for this kind of stuff. But I mean, the thing is, the dudes from For Today walk in, they are real, they are who they are. They don't exist anymore as a band, sadly, but they didn't make any excuses. They just got up there and they preached the gospel, and they did it with boldness. And, you know, they might have gotten some people who were pissed at them, but I haven't heard any stories of any backlash from their preaching at shows. I've only heard of people coming up to them afterwards and being like, "Thank you. I want to become a Christian," which is kind of cool. You know, you have to admit that that's kind of cool. So, but again, I don't think that's necessarily a valid argument for why Christian heavy music is good, but I think it's just a point of for us of why it has been so, there's been such a good impact in our lives from it. It's because of that.
It's definitely not it's definitely not a philosophical argument, but yeah, it's there's fruit there, right? Like,
And you brought up a really valid point. Like, at a time, especially when we were starving for that witness of the gospel, we knew that the Catholic faith was the one true faith. You know, we knew that the teachings of Christ and the church were true. So it wasn't like we were being led astray into Protestantism, but we did need kind of that boldness to inspire us. I don't know if that's true for you, but I would say for me, I say for Julie, it was so needed because we were so burnt out from the lackadaisical approach of bishops, priests, cardinals,
everyone,
popes, who just didn't popes. Preach. Yeah. So
that's about it for that topic.
One thing that you did say in the show notes, I did want to point out too. You're saying that heavy music can be manly in a few ways that set it apart from other modern music. I think that's a really good point. Like the complexity, the amount of work that it takes for these guys to get so good at their craft that like, I remember going to see, for example, Animals as Leaders, and they're not a Christian band. They play pretty much all instrumental. I don't know if they have any. Yeah, completely instrumental. They've never had lyrics. Yeah. But it's insane. Like, it is insane. And it, in watching these guys get up and play, no, it's not chant and it's not meant to be chant, but it is something that inspires us to be stronger, to do better at the things in our life that are set before us. We're like, look at this guy. Like, like, you know, and I can't even, you know, like, I need to be better at my job. Like, I need to be better at being a husband, being a father, you know, I need to fix the dang fridge. I you know, like, I need to do better at life because this guy is obviously doing it. And and it's amazing. Just absolutely there's something about seeing a guy who spent 10,000 hours mastering an instrument and playing it just to an incredible degree. It's so inspiring. Yeah. And that's something that I think modern music outside of the metal scene has lost completely. Like, it exists in classical music. It exists in like the Latin mass liturgical music and stuff. And, but it doesn't exist in modern pop music. It doesn't exist in, folk music at your local Novus Ordo. It doesn't exist in Matt Maher type Life Team music. But it does exist in heavy music. Yeah. It does exist in like progressive rock and stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's not to say that these other artists like Matt Maher aren't good at what they do or whatever, but I've never been to a Matt Maher concert, and I have been to one. And actually I've been to two, I think. I've never been to them and gone, whoa, that guy. So inspired. I'm gonna go He's home. He's so good at playing those chords. Yeah, that 4-chord progression, so sick. Yeah, it just doesn't to the same degree. But I mean, when like going to Animals and Leaders, for example, it also kind of opens up kind of your, if you allow it raises your mind to the complexity of God, to the beautiful things that He can do, that only he can do. I mean, he is the master musician. Creation is a beautiful symphony that he has created, and that is all singing praise to him. And, you know, just this microcosm. You can meditate on
like how, the details of how he created sound and your ears to be able to like appreciate the subtle differences in these different notes and rhythms, and how your brain can appreciate all this.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. There is a really interesting quote here that, again, from Benedict XVI. He said, "Art in all its forms, at the point where it encounters the great questions of our existence, the fundamental themes that gives life its meaning, can take on a religious quality, thereby turning into a path of profound inner reflection and spirituality." Right? So he says art in all its forms. So that includes music, right? So, the fact that you can experience these moments where you start considering the transcendent beauty of God, instead of wallowing in yourself, right? And again, we're not saying that you have to feel the exact same way that we do, but this is just the kind of subjective experience that we've had, or at least that I've had when going to these kinds of events and seeing this kind of skill and mastery.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you want to move ahead?
I just saw in the show notes your note on syncopation. That's amazing.
Actually, before we move ahead, something else that I wanted to point out too. So if you listen to bands like Animals as Leaders, it's another band like Animals as Leaders. Can you think of another band
with
like
a lot of technicality, something like Dream Theater, or
yeah,
they're not instrumental.
Yeah,
looking for that kind of thing.
Yeah. So this quote comes from Father Basil Cole. He's a Dominican, I believe, out of the Washington province, and he wrote a dissertation called "The Moral and Psychological Effects of Music: A Theological Appraisal." It's really, really good. We'll include it in the show notes. But he says about Boethius, he says, "Boethius was the cause of many ecclesiastics believing that the more one follows the mathematical rules of music, the more indicative music is of the moral life. Breaking the so-called laws of music, an occurrence which takes place in the history of music over the centuries, will usually be frowned upon by the past moralists among the early centuries, perhaps as a sign of breaking natural laws themselves. But as we saw in the early 12th century, musicians were no mathematicians and therefore became prone to breaking all kinds of rules to create the music form called the motet. This creative process has continued until the present day, sometimes with great success and sometimes with great failure." So yeah, just like the fact that the closer music form is to mathematics, the more indicative it is of the moral life, according to Boethius, right? So like listening to something like Animals and Leaders, when you're like, oh my gosh, like what is happening here? It's all math. Like there's so much math happening right now. Like the time signatures and things like that. It's neat.
It's a thing where they're playing with the math all the time, right? With weird time signatures and tempo changes and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the coffee thing?
Go for it.
So yeah, talking about the morality of music in and of itself. I think we've talked before on the podcast about the morality of certain types of music, or maybe most of that was kind of off the record with Boniface.
Yeah, maybe.
But I was reading Boniface, aka Unum Sanctum Catholicum blogger.
Great guy.
Who was interviewed in season 1, reading his articles on Christian rock and syncopation. And kind of a funny comparison struck me. Maybe this is just me being dumb comparing this, but I thought about coffee, and maybe it's related to how I kind of think about music as my coffee for work. But when coffee came to Europe, it was very frowned upon by faithful Christians and very suspect, probably for good reasons, because, you've got this weird, strange, bitter drink coming out of Arabia. It seems kind of like a drug. It makes your heart race. It makes you feel different. And, it's coming out of the foreign lands of violent people who's been invading all over the world, who's threatening to conquer Europe. They follow this outrageous heresy called Islam. The stories are all about them being rife with violence and sexual immorality. And here's this export from their lands that you should drink, So of course the pious Christian is going to be very suspicious of this drink, with good reason. And I definitely feel like there's some justified hesitation on the part of good Catholics toward heavy music. Because, look at where rock came from in the early bands that espoused it, that were deeply involved in the sexual revolution. A lot of them were involved in the occult. And there continues to be a ton of bands in the heavy music scene that are into the occult, anti-Christian, blasphemous, satanic.
Very bad stuff. Even the most recent, or not the most recent, but the recent Black Mass that happened in Ottawa was held in the heavy metal bar in Ottawa.
Yeah. A place where they do metal concerts and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think much like coffee, it's the actual substance of the thing is not bad. Like the substance of coffee, totally a good thing if used correctly, right? And I think it can be similar with certain sounds that are used in heavy music, certain rhythms, like even syncopation, which is often singled out as the bad guy.
Yep.
And if you read, we'll drop Boniface's blogs in the show notes where he kind of exposes some of the pseudoscience that's been used to say that syncopation has a bad effect on the human body. But I think it's a similar thing. Like there's a healthy hesitation towards the thing, but the thing itself is not actually bad.
Yep.
That's the position I take anyway.
Yeah. And again, this is not a matter of saying, okay, well, this is what we feel, therefore you should feel it too. Like Boniface says in his blog too, Catholics are free to feel how they feel about this because there's not really a definitive teaching on it. But I think, really in all things, right, there is that need for discernment and to be intentional with the music you're listening to, because there can become an unhealthy attachment even to good Christian music. St. John of the Cross kind of makes reference to these attachments in his Ascent of Mount Carmel. Father Mark Foley talks about that in his commentary on it. He says, that say, for example, you're listening to music and it's raising your mind and your heart to God, and you are, experiencing the benefit of that music, then that's a good and holy thing. But let's say, for example, you're listening to the music and suddenly your mind starts daydreaming. You start envisioning yourself in a band, and you want to see yourself on that stage receiving the praise of the crowds. And you want to be so good at you want to become so good at playing a guitar or the drums or whatever that, you receive all the praise and adulation that you can. He says at that point, turn it off. Because it is no longer doing the thing that it should be doing, right? Which is reminding you of God and helping you to understand yourself. It is now making you want things that aren't real and becoming prideful or becoming whatever, right? And so, Yeah, and that can happen whether you're listening to Christian music or you're listening even to Gregorian chant. There's the potential that you could start listening to Gregorian chant and you start thinking to yourself, especially if you're a guy like me who's in a schola, you start saying, why am I not very good at this? I should be better. I need to, and say you start falling into self-pity or whatever. Why can't I play the organ as good as Teresa, or why can't I do this, or why can't I do that? And at that point, turn it off. It's no longer praising God. It's just causing you to become like self-centered, and even though it's a good thing. So be intentional with the music that you consume. Don't be slothful about it, but be intentional. And it actually does take virtue to do that. It is a practiced habit. It's not easy. I will tell you firsthand, it is not easy. When I read that thing from Father Mark Foley, I found myself incredibly challenged. And how dare you? But it's true. Because the end goal of music really should be to raise our minds and hearts to God and to the eternal beatitude of heaven. And I think inevitably it should lead us to silence. It should lead us to reflection. I think it's kind of interesting that you kind of see this even mirrored in our own liturgies, especially in the traditional Latin Mass, right? There's the beautiful hymns, the different propers, and then silence at the most important part, right? At that time when God becomes truly physically present to us, it is silent. St. John of the Cross said that God spoke only one word, and he spoke that in silence. So, I don't know. Like, I think music is meant to lead to that place where there's no more music, and it moves us towards charity and love of God and love of neighbor.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a couple of thoughts. The first thing I was going to say is along the lines of consuming music intentionally, virtuously. Music is, I think, a good subject of penances and fasting as well. Like if you're looking for something to give up for Lent, a certain type of music that you enjoy, or something to give up during Advent because it's a penitential season. #OK Catholics.
Yeah.
The other thing is, it's a funny, when you're mentioning how music naturally ends in silence and contemplation, it's a funny contrast with the things you hear in pop music. One of the biggest themes in like dance music and pop music is how we're never going to stop partying. We're never going to stop playing music. We're never going to go to sleep.
That's true.
We're going to party all night. We're going to party all day. We're never going to stop ever.
Yeah.
Ever, ever, ever. Because if we stop, we might have to think about what we're doing with our life. Yeah. That's the subtext that I hear. But, like, we're just going to keep drinking. We're just going to keep dancing. We're just going to keep partying. That's it.
Yeah.
Nothing else. There's nothing else beyond that. Who cares if you make terrible decisions? Because there's nothing else other than dancing and partying going on. That's just the complete opposite of like a healthy appreciation of music that leads you to silence and contemplation of truth and beauty and goodness.
Yeah. Even though I don't support the entire catalog of theology and works by this author, I found this quote incredibly interesting when thought about in the context of the traditional Latin Mass. And this is by Hans Urs von Balthasar. This is dedicated to our good friends in Catching Foxes. Um, so he said, but listen to this quote. It's actually good. He said, "Beauty is the word with which we shall begin. Beauty is the last word that the thinking intellect dares to speak, because it simply forms a halo, an untouchable crown around the double constellation of the true and the good, and their inseparable relation to one another." He then adds, "Beauty is the disinterested one, without which the ancient world refused to understand itself, a word which both imperceptibly and yet unmistakably has bid farewell to our new world, a world of interests, leaving it to its own avarice and sadness. It is no longer loved or fostered even by religion." And he concludes, "We can be sure that whoever sneers at her name as if she were the ornament of a bourgeois past, whether he admits it or not, can no longer pray and soon will no longer be able to love." End quote. I read that and I was like, this is why we love the Latin Mass, right?
Yeah.
Because it is beautiful. The music is beautiful. Everything about it is beautiful. And it's the antithesis for what's going on in the world today, and especially in the Novus Ordo Church. Maybe we can kind of jump off this into the recent news. So right now, I believe they're just finishing up. We're recording this on November 23rd. So they're just finishing up the National Catholic Youth Conference in Indianapolis. And so they hold the event in a stadium in the Lucas Oil Stadium, which holds like 25,000 people. So it's normally packed. But long story short, so a huge contingent of the young people from that conference, the National Catholic Youth Conference, which is a Novus Ordo through and through conference, the lights, the sound, it's very Protestant looking. It doesn't really look like true Catholicism at all. It's built in the round, and everybody's facing each other, and yeah. Anyway, so long story short, a large contingent of young people flooded from this conference, flooded into one of the archdiocese's largest churches. So Father John Hollowell, a priest in that diocese, tweeted this out just earlier today, where he said, "Praying that NCYC recognizes that today's solemn Latin High Mass filled one of Arch-Indy's largest churches to overflowing, and that most priests here at NCYC are talking about taking their kids elsewhere in the future, unless the stadium paraliturgies," end quote, "move toward tradition." So the movement of traditionalism is growing, and I think there is a clear reason why these kids went from the banal liturgies of the NCYC and went in search of the true, the good, the beautiful, right? You might be able to hear good preaching at NCYC. I don't know. I know that there's a few good people there right now.
Apparently there was some good talks and preaching from what I heard.
Yeah.
But again, yeah.
But there's also these
It doesn't negate the point.
Yeah. And as well at this NCYC event, there was a fortune teller. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So crazy. And apparently this was shut down by the NCYC organizers after people saw it and complained to them. But apparently there was someone claiming to be a nun. I'm not sure if that was the case. Maybe it is. But someone doing fortune telling at NCYC set up with a booth with a table and a crystal ball and just dressed like you would imagine a fortune teller, with like a big colorful shawl on and stuff, and just doing fortune telling. And the sign up saying like fortune tellers, like fortune telling by a sister led by the Holy Spirit. What?
Yeah.
How does that even happen?
Yeah.
I mean, I can to a degree be charitable and say it's a huge conference. Maybe a sister wants to set up a booth and they don't ask too many questions. And then when they found out what it was, they ended up shutting her down, which is good.
Yeah.
But wow, that is just...
It's insane. It's insane. So, I think if anything, NCYC should be something that you be very cautious of if you are sending your children there. But it is also encouraging to know that there was a large contingent of young traditional Catholics who were like, we're out, and went to the solemn high mass in the traditional Latin mass form. So yeah,
that's the big positive, right? Thousands of teens probably experiencing the Latin mass, possibly for the first time, right?
Yeah, it's a big deal.
That's going to change you, when you see what has been destroyed. It's hard to unsee.
Exactly.
Go back, it's hard to see the beauty of that liturgy and then think, oh yeah, this is better somehow.
Yeah. So maybe this helps. We don't know. It's kind of us just discussing candidly about our experience with music, right? It's not. Yeah. Let us know what you think. If you still disagree, let us know. If you agree, let us know.
We'd love to discuss, even if you disagree with us.
Yeah.
I mean, our last 2 episodes have basically been like, let's take the things about us as trads that are most likely to trigger our fellow trads and talk about D&D and then heavy metal.
Yeah.
And then no one will listen to us anymore. So.
Yet our numbers are going up. I don't know. We'll see.
We'll just go back to normal trad stuff after this episode.
Yeah, exactly. If there's any real takeaway, I don't know, what would you say the takeaway from this episode should be, Mike?
I think it's really the idea of being intentional with music and looking for the true, the good, and the beautiful. I don't want to try to evangelize people to listen to heavy music. If they don't, that's 100% fine. But the more important point is to use it to grow in holiness, just like anything else in life. That's it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Maybe before we roll out, I just want to quickly give a quick shout out to our good buddy Joanna on our Facebook page, was super kind and left us a sweet review. So thank you very much, Joanna. She said about us, she said, fantastic, candid conversations that I would love to be right in the middle of. So it is certainly wonderful to listen to. They cover all sorts of interesting topics with quirky little nerdy sidetracks.
Hey, we don't have nerdy sidetracks. Thinks back on this episode we just recorded. Yes, we do.
An entire nerdy sidetrack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This whole episode is a nerdy sidetrack.
Yeah, it is.
She's so right.
Yeah, she really is.
Thank you for the review, Joanna.
Yeah, you're really sweet. Thanks so much. So yeah, we'd love for you to leave a review for us. If you're a Facebook person, leave us a Facebook review there. You could do it on iTunes as well. We'd really appreciate it there because it helps us to get noticed in the podcast list on iTunes. So the more reviews we get, the more likely they'll put us up in recommendeds and things like that. Yeah. So, dude, what should we expect next week? What do you think?
Possibly is it Brooke's interview next week?
Yeah.
Yeah, an interview not by Chris. It's my lovely wife, Brooke.
She's growing up so fast.
Yeah. Interviewing, I think it's David Rummelhoff. I might be saying the name wrong. But David, the founder of Peter's Square, an online shop for Catholic makers, kind of similar to an Etsy, but for Catholic stuff. And founder of a couple of other new online Catholic businesses that are up and coming. So really cool guy, and should be a great conversation.
Yeah, definitely something to listen to as we're coming into the biggest consumer time of the year, Christmas shopping and all of that. So yeah, if you want to learn about really cool Catholic businesses, definitely check that out. Yeah, so it'll be live next Wednesday. Yeah, besides that, yeah, I don't think we've got any other news. If you've made it to the end of this, God bless you. You've done it.
Yeah. And if you're Chris and you've made it to the end of editing this episode, God bless you. And I'm sorry.
We made it though, so it's good. It's good. Okay. Well, from all of us here at Theology of the Buddy,
stay tratty.
Thanks so much for listening to today's podcast. I really hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I did. What impact has music had on your life? What kind of music do you enjoy listening to, and why? We really want to know, so message us on Facebook or DM on Instagram at Theology of the Buddy, find us on Twitter at TradFriends, or email us at theologyofthebuddy@gmail.com. You can also send us a voicemail via Facebook Messenger. If you like what you heard today, please consider subscribing to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to great podcasts. Would you also please consider rating and reviewing us on iTunes? We'd greatly appreciate it, as it helps us to get noticed within the larger podcast community. Next week, Brooke interviews David Rummelhoff, founder of Peter's Square, an online marketplace for Catholic makers, and discusses with him a wide variety of topics surrounding Catholic entrepreneurship. Make sure you're subscribed so you can listen as soon as the episode is out. We'll save you a seat at the table. New episodes are released every Wednesday, so until then, stay tratty.